Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Sometimes history books can be dense and academic, but not those written by the New York Times columnist Gail Collins. In her latest book, When Everything Changed, The Amazing Journey of American Women from 1960 to the Present, she explains how we went from June Cleaver, who was the mother of the household on Leave It to Beaver, that early sitcom, to Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. With her earlier book, America's Women, and I have to read the subtitle, 400 Years of Dolls, Drudges, Helpmates, and Heroines, Ms. Collins has completed an amazing as well as entertaining social history of American women. I really loved reading the books, and I couldn't wait to get to the next stage.
Thank you.
You know, Bella Abzug, and we're talking about history. I've met young people who've never heard of Bella. She was, what would we say,
She was the congresswoman, obviously, and what was amazing about Bella Abzug was that, and we've been talking just before about how all these new right-wing women who've got coming up, they're all glamorous.
Yeah.
Bella Abzug was just herself. She was like, and Gloria Steinem always said, the person who showed that you didn't have to be glamorous, you just had to be yourself to the loudest degree possible in order to be effective.
But she thought she was glamorous.
Yes,
now let's not discount her.
That's true.
She paid a lot of attention to hats and clothes.
Much hats.
And I was.
Well, she had the hats because her mother told her, if you wear a hat, and it was true back then, if you wear a hat, that means you're not a secretary.
Right. You don't have to get the coffee, right?
Yeah.
But she had a motto a slogan when she ran for Congress, that this woman's place is in the House. But she meant in the House of Representatives and not in the home. And that always fascinated me because I think that was always something that we all worried about. Where were we supposed to be? I mean, I grew up thinking, you know, I'd college and then I'd work a little bit, and then I'd get married and I'd have children and I would be a housemaker, a housewife. And that was my big aspiration.
The interesting thing was that you had this whole generation of women, and that had been the story throughout American history. And for most of American history, that was the smartest decision you could make, because there was no job a woman could get, for the most part, that was nearly as creative and nearly as much of a managerial kind of job as running a household was. Because if you go out in the world, you're working for some other woman cleaning her house, or you're working for a man at a store. Or you're not doing surgery or something.
You never thought about going, very few people thought about going to medical school or even law school.
And the interesting thing about after World War II was the economy exploded so much that it was easier for so many families to send their daughters to college as well as their sons, under the theory that would help the daughter to meet a man who had been to college and have a better marriage. What they didn't count on was all these girls are going through college and they're having the same experience that the guys are. They're turning in the same papers. They're getting better grades, and then they're supposed to stop. And for a lot of them, it just didn't work out that way. You know?
It's the part when I was growing up and running a household, and it was a busy household. I had 3 kids, and I was, you know, a member of my local Democratic club and active in politics. I always loved it. Was not realizing the skills that I had developed as the homemaker or the runner of the household. And so I think in my age, which was a little before yours, when women then started to go out to look for a job, they didn't realize that they really had abilities to do something different.
True. And people weren't sort of geared up to kind of process them through at that point either. But, you know, I'm always concerned when I go out and talk that you give respect to the women who stayed home and were mothers, because we have this terrible tendency to say, well, we were oppressed forever, and then in 1960 we got our freedom, and now we don't do that stuff anymore. And it wasn't that. It was a much more complicated story.
And my 2 daughters are now home. And they've got families. And they're thinking, I mean, they both were, one is a lawyer and the other was a television producer. And
they'll both go back and do things
They'll
again
go back to work,
older,
but they love being home. And of course, I loved it. It was the best time of my life, I think.
Well, you know, so many guys, I was just talking with a friend of mine, Rebecca Traister, who has just written a great book about the election and Hillary Clinton. She said that she was at a meeting with a bunch of young women who had just gotten married or about to be married, all professionals, and all their husbands wanted to stay home. It's really very attractive when you think about it. If you're thinking in terms of, well, I'll have my career, then I'll stay home for 10 years with my kids and stuff.
And then you'll go back.
And go into politics or contribute to the community or do whatever, and then I'll go back. It really, there are a ton of people who would vote for that if they could The problem is that most families can't afford that anymore.
No, that's definitely one of the things that contributes to it. The other thing also is, I mean, it's a changing in a way of what I mean, we've had so much about money and making a lot of money. This is very, I guess, middle class or something, I don't know. You want to be the CEO or you want to have this important title, so that always becomes a conflict if you're going to take time off. And I think increasingly, maybe, do you think now with the finances the way they are that more people are giving up that aspiration of having really a lot of money?
No.
I don't know where I came up with this question, but anyway.
Money, who wants money?
Yeah.
What's happened, and often people say to me, well, what about if things all turn around? What if they go backwards and women aren't working anymore or so on? It's never going to happen. It's not about women's choice in that sense. It's about the fact that after World War II, the economy just shot through the roof and created a standard of living the world had never seen before. Most people owned their own houses. They had their car, they went on vacations, they had a television set, they wanted to send their kids to college. And they did that for about 5 seconds on one salary. There was that one brief shining moment in the 50s and 60s. Then, the 70s came, oil embargoes, inflation, housing prices went through the roof, and never again, I think probably, will a middle-class average family be able to keep their standard of living with one salary. So it's not like women are going to be choosing whether they want to go to work or not. Women are going to have to work their whole lives.
And they were also not growing up thinking that they shouldn't work.
No, there came a moment, and we'll never know when it is, sometime probably in the 1980s, when the average 8th grade girl, when she thought about her future, thought about it just naturally in terms of both, will I get married, who will I marry, but also what am I going to do to help support my family? How will I work? What will I work at? And that was the cosmic overriding change. And it's never going to go back.
It really has made, I mean, the interesting thing about this is with all the working parents or single women working and still being heads of household, we've never been able to provide the early childhood education and assistance.
That's the most amazing thing. The nation has never had it. We've now got
it's so incredible.
Half the workforce is female, and we have not yet had the conversation about who takes care of the kids when all this happens. And it's so tragic to me that that's such a loser issue for politicians. Any politician that works on early childhood education is just doing God's work, because you get not a bit of credit for it in the world. You don't get any money, you don't get any votes, you don't get anything. You just do it for
And Obama, it seemed to me, did mention it.
Well, his wife,
interested. She certainly
did a lot. Although Michelle Obama, during the campaign, tried to make that her signature thing. She would go around and have all these round tables, and women would talk about the stresses, and it didn't get any traction at all. Really.
And what's interesting is now with these conservative women, I mean, now look at politics. It's so different, right?
Yes.
Hillary Clinton's campaign was, it just changed the world, I think, don't you? The perception?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very flexible country. As soon as something looks normal,
then we go.
Everybody's fine, you move forward. She made it normal for a woman to run for president, and it'll never be a big deal again.
And the fact that she's the Secretary of State, and there are a lot of women in the cabinet. Right? The Health and Human Services, that's a very important age. Anyway, with all these women now in politics and this rise of these conservative women, they never mention that, do they?
It's interesting. I thought the last election, when you had two of the candidates, when you had finally two candidates running, in Sarah Palin and Barack Obama, who had working spouses and small children, I thought, wow, this is going to be part of the conversation. And it really wasn't. Obama would mention it on occasion. But for Sarah Palin, she never talked about it, and she really tried to make it seem as if it was incredibly easy.
Right, she dragged the whole family
along with her. Yeah,
the whole
family. She's nursing a baby. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago you'd have a vice presidential candidate nursing her baby on the bus going around? But she didn't really talk about it. She tried to present it, because if you don't present it as an easy thing, then you talk either about how you feel you're shortchanging your families in some ways, or about how you need some kind of community support in order to do this. And she didn't talk about any of those things.
The other big difference when we talk about working as a parent, when I started working, I was the second wage earner in the family, and I had political jobs, basically. I mean, I went back to work with John Lindsay as a member of the administration. But I was embarrassed to discuss my title, how much money I wanted. I mean, I remember saying this ridiculous thing that when I met him over at Gracie Mansion, that my husband says I need to make $25,000 or I'll have to be an au pair girl. I mean, it's incredible. Then he died, and I was the sole support of those kids, and that changed. Then I didn't feel guilty about working because I knew I had to work, and then I had to make as much money as I could. So it was a very interesting change, but I think now it's an accepted thing. You don't go in with a different low title and you're not going to be satisfied with lower pay.
So many of the women who were the breakthrough women in various court cases and whatever, working class women, often from the South, who filed these suits despite the fact that everybody thought it was a bad idea in their town, maybe even in their families. It was almost always because they needed the money for their families. They wanted to send their kids to school. They wanted to buy a house. And that propelled them into saying, why can't I have that job? And then filing suits to demand that.
You had some earlier women than Ledbetter in your books. I mean, who was the first woman that you thought did that?
Oh, wow, there were just a ton of, there's this woman I just adored named Lorena Weeks. She's still alive. She lives down in Georgia. Her father died when she was very young, so she had always worked to help support her family. Then her mother died, and she had the rest of the little kids to raise while she worked 2 jobs and so on. Finally, she got married. She worked for the phone company. Her husband was a mailman. And she applied for this job as a you sort of run around checking all the equipment to make sure it works. They called it a lineman, but it wasn't like going outside being a lineman. And they said, no, you have to move a 30-pound piece of equipment, and that's under the law too heavy for a woman. And she said, but it's on a cart. You just push it. And they said, no, that's the rule. So she then stopped putting her typewriter, which weighed 35 pounds, on her desk every morning. There was a big fight. She filed a suit. And it was the definitive case because you had all these states that said, well, of course, women get equal rights, except we have these rules. You know, you can't, women can't lift, women have to have extra time off, yada, yada, yada. And she was the one who broke through all that. And she wanted to send her kids to college. And that was all she was thinking about. When was that, do you know? She did, this was in the late 60s, early 70s.
That's something, yeah.
And, you know, I'm always, for both of the books that I wrote, in awe of the women who just do something they think is right when nobody thinks it's a good idea. We're so used now to going to things and everybody goes, you go girl, yes, yes, we're all supporting you. Yeah. Nobody thought this was a good idea. Her family was sort of embarrassed. Her neighbors thought it was crazy. The people at her office resented her, and she went on for years in court fighting this suit. Just kept going.
So it all comes from inside.
She's spectacular.
Right. My first job was at CBS. And all the male boys, which was the career ladder, were men, and the women all started as secretaries. And you could really very rarely get a promotion. All the people on camera, the news department was totally male. I mean, there were once in a while. I wanted to be a production assistant in news, and I never could get a job. You could work. They hired a woman on a Saturday religion show, a Sunday religion show. That was the only show. But that was always so interesting because it just, and people just accepted it.
And the news magazines had that famous career ladder where the women all became researchers and the men became writers. So the women found out what was happening and the men would write it up and got the bylines. And there's Nora Ephron, when she came out of college, applied to Newsweek, I think it was, and they said, women don't write. So, Nora Ephron, women don't write, Nora Ephron, go away. Yeah. And that was just true for everybody back then.
So now you look at it. We look at the Supreme Court. It's amazing, isn't it? Mm-hmm. 3 New Yorkers and 3 from New York, which is really amazing. And then you look at an evening television. You've got 2 anchors that are female.
And that was just such a short time ago where, you know, and I remember too when I was growing up, the idea that you'd have a female anchor on the local news was totally unthought of. And now sometimes you turn on and there's 2 women doing the news, you know, 2 African-American women doing it. Nobody thinks about these things anymore, and that's just huge. Katie Couric did another huge thing when she made that breakthrough, and now there's 2. Diane and Katie are both on, and nobody thinks about it at all.
Yeah, it's really, so what else do you think is shocking and that younger people don't remember or that we do?
Well, you know, the thing when when I go back, when I talked to a whole mess of women who had sort of been average women during this period and just had them tell me about their lives and stuff. And at first, nobody thought of that as a bad period for the most part, because, you know, the economy was great, things were going well, but then you talk to them for a while and stuff would come up. And always there's a story about slacks.
Oh, that's right.
Somebody, you know, you couldn't wear slacks when you went to work. One poor woman said she worked for the post office, and in the winter, you know, you couldn't wear slacks to work. Or you could wear them in, but then you had to change into a skirt before you went to work sorting mail in the evening or something like that. And always had stories about that. And it fascinates younger women that there was a time when women could not wear pants.
When did that happen? I mean, I know that happened in my life, and now I never wear a skirt. But when did that happen?
It was in the 60s that it changed, the late 60s, really. In fact, I remembered, I had forgotten it too, talk about blocking things out. I went to college in the late 60s at a Jesuit school, so it was pretty conservative anyway, but we could not wear slacks out of the dormitory unless we were going bowling. So we signed out for
Did you
bowling
always
a
go
lot.
bowling?
We went bowling so much, I've got to tell you. But the year that I left, which was I think 68 or 69, they, all the women had a slack in one day, and they just all went to school wearing slacks. And instantly, the administration caved in. You know, it took nothing to get them to give up on this once they fought it.
Do you think all of these things started with the civil rights movement?
Oh, totally. Completely. You know, women's movement in general in America, and I don't know how it worked out in other countries, sort of piggybacked on other movements. 'Cause it's different. I mean, women, they're literally sleeping with the enemy. I mean, women do not see their future as happy if they get stuff, but their husbands and sons and brothers don't get stuff. So it's a much more complicated kind of story than it would be if you're an ethnic group or a religious group. And it's always been that, you know, the abolition movement propelled women forward, and the women's movement forward. The progressive movement came, and then women also moved forward. And the civil rights movement was totally and completely the reason that everything started. And if you remember that period, people came to grips with the fact that something that wrong had been legal and supported by authority. And authority figures not only lost standing with the rest of the community, in particularly places like New York, but they lost their own kind of self-confidence about what they could do or say. And my favorite story of all in the book is about New York, about Barnard. In 68, I think it was, the Times ran a story about how college students were cohabiting. This big, huge trend, oh my God. And they had pseudonyms for all the people they were talking about, because this was so shocking, you would never admit to it. But the story of one was way too informative, and Barnard figured out very fast that it was a sophomore named Linda LeClaire who had told them she was going to work as an au pair, and that's why she couldn't live in the dormitory, but who was living with her boyfriend. And Linda LeClaire fought back, and she would not go back to the dorm. She was picketing the dorm with her friends and her boyfriends, and the Times was covering this as if this was nuclear war. They were so fascinated by this. And then the alumni got so upset because this is going on, and the poor president is trying to deal with all this stuff. She appoints a blue ribbon committee about what to do with Linda LeClaire. They have all these meetings. They finally come back and say, unless Linda LeClaire comes back to the dorm, she is going to be banished from the snack bar forever. You know. That's the kind. They caved over everything. It was a wonderful time to be a protester, really.
I went to Barnard, but earlier in I graduated in '52, and then we made fun of the earlier classes that were told not to wear patent leather shoes because
they reflected up. Oh yes,
and not to say soup because it puckers up your lips. You should say bouillon. And of course, there was no necking in the dorms downstairs, and it was always, that was a struggle.
Well, Muriel Fox, who you probably know, told me that when she was at Barnard, when the senior class was getting their party before graduation, if you were engaged, you got a corsage. If you were not engaged, you got lemons. And she never got over that. She had been married for like 50 years, and she was still remembering the lemons.
And the president, she wasn't the president, she was called the dean at the time, was Millicent McIntosh, who was married to a very wealthy doctor. And she had, I think, 5 children. But she also had a whole cadre of support and everything. And she used to say, you can have both. And then when we found out you couldn't have both, it was a very different story.
It's no trouble at all. You just need to make sure you've got all the maids in order.
So let's talk about these women now running for office. I mean, part of the women's movement, I went through consciousness raising groups, and I worked at Ms. Magazine, and I used to talk about to women that you know so much, and it's just a different vocabulary. You know how to make a presentation if you know how to talk at the PTA. But anyway, we always felt we had to be really smart, very prepared, always smarter than the other person. It used to be the motto that you know when you're really equal is when you can be mediocre, right? But these women don't seem to me to be very smart, and they don't mind saying
You're thinking about
anything.
the Tea Party women,
Yeah,
sort of, yeah.
they don't mind saying anything. What is that?
Well, there's several different things, but the one thing that I think is important to remember is that women always do well in situations where something is new and it's not organized very well. You know, if you look at early radio or early TV or early aviation, there were a lot of women. And then once it got organized and there was power and profit and stuff, then things got a lot harder. Tea Party is a totally perfect example. Very easy to move forward in the Tea Party. Yeah. There's like no plan for the Tea Party. And so you've got all these women popping up. The interesting and disturbing thing to me is, I would just like one homely Tea Party woman at some point in time. They are all the ones that are being celebrated. It's so glamorous. Yeah. It's very weird. And it's also very depressing that so many of them do seem to be not at all prepared. Which is not what you'd like to see.
It's just shocking. Well, what goes on inside of them? How does Michelle Bachmann? We don't know very much about her. Do you know her about? I mean, is she married? Does she have children?
She's married. She has children, and she's comes from one of those families that we never give enough credit to. These religious conservative families who take in tons of foster children and try to sort of really live out their thing. So she's done all that, and then she started in the state Senate on an anti-gay marriage sort of thing, and made a big splash with that, and then used that as a platform to run for Congress. But the thing you have to remember is that right now, the media, no matter who you are, is really rewarding people who have a lot of sassy style and who say outrageous things and who look very good on television. But I don't think you're going to find that over the long run these people are really rewarded with serious posts. I mean, nobody in the Republican leadership was going to let Michelle Bachmann be in their leadership in the House. They're just completely trying to run around her. And Sarah Palin is not going to be president of the United States. I have to keep telling people that, but
you have that on very good authority.
I swear to you, it's not going to happen.
And it doesn't take much. I don't mean to downgrade your intelligence, but if we're at all smart, we know that, don't we?
Well, you never can tell in this world, but I'm very, 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 very confident that Sarah Palin will not be president.
Do you think she wants to run?
It's not at all clear to me exactly. And to be fair, also, she's not the only one. If you look at, say, a Mike Huckabee, who's another person that people are
talking about
flopping up. He's got the same deal. He's got a TV show. He's got all the stuff he does. He takes people on religious cruises and stuff and makes money doing that. And he's got lots of income coming in. He has lots of platforms and
lots of money. Yeah.
To give all that up for a very painful run for president that will probably not lead to success is a lot to ask for these people.
She's really created an empire.
Yeah.
So she can't be too dumb.
I never thought that she was dumb.
Yeah.
She's just not curious.
Right.
And not prepared. I mean, I find it offensive that she's as ill-prepared for stuff.
I do too. I think it's terrible, and that we still keep inviting her and talking about her. It just is not right.
Well, we got all that time to fill, and it gets kind of boring out there,
So what's the future with all these young women? What's going to happen?
Well, we're at a point right now where if you look at colleges, women are outperforming men by sort of massive leaps and bounds. And what they always say is then after college it all stops, because women don't outperform men in corporate settings. They don't become partners in law firms. There's only, 17 of them in the U.S. Senate and so on, much of which I'm absolutely sure has to do with this work-family thing. It's very, very difficult to have a job that takes 80 hours a week when you've got kids, and so you lose sort of a lot by the way. But what I'm looking at now is the next generation coming up. If you're a business and you're looking out at college, and most of the people coming out of accounting programs or coming out of veterinary medicine programs or astrology programs, zoology programs are women, you're going to have to change the way you organize your career ladder to accommodate their needs. Yeah. And so I'm thinking that maybe in 20 years we're going to see another kind of big leap forward as far as women's role. And I'm very interested to see how this all works out with guys. I was at a college in Connecticut last year. It was a state school, and it was very much the kind of school where most of the kids are first generation to go to college. And I was with a group of about 20, guys and women, and I asked the men, how many of you, when you think about a woman that you really might want to marry, you're going to get serious about, how many of you think it's important that she be a good earner? And they all raised their hands. I mean, that is like another huge, there's so many big changes coming. I don't think we'll recognize the world.
They must get tired of having all the responsibility. Or thinking they have the responsibility.
Yeah, and they know how much it costs to buy a house and stuff. I mean, if you've got a woman who, does not have any kind of capacity to do more and get minimum wage, it really drags down the entire family's possibilities.
So if we have that, then are we going to eventually have early childhood education and good child care and things like that?
I keep thinking that, parents are not going to accept anything else at some point along the way, but I got to say we're not there yet. It's the great challenge of the future.
But the rise of women and the power and their influence in life has been it's very helpful to society, right?
Yes, and it's not over yet. Stuff is still happening.
Yeah. Well, and you describe it wonderfully. So
thanks.
We've come to the end of this program. Thank you so much.
Great to be here.
Is there any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore? Please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.